There is a very specific, very primal kind of terror that strikes a man when he looks out his kitchen window at 6 a.m. on a Tuesday. I had a mug of dark roast halfway to my lips, still wearing my mismatched pajama pants, when I saw her. Brenda, president of the Colonial Estates Homeowners Association, dictator of driveways, the absolute monarch of mulch. She was wearing a pastel pink velour tracksuit that belonged in a 2004 music video, and she was standing right in the middle of my front yard. Worse, she was holding a neon yellow Stanley tape measure, pulling the metal strip out, locking it, writing something down on a clipboard, and letting it retract with a violent SNICK. I took a slow sip of my coffee. Breathe, I told myself. Just breathe. Maybe she lost a very small, very geometrically precise dog. Nope. She marched over to my mailbox, slapped a fluorescent orange envelope onto the side of it with a piece of aggressive packing tape, and marched back across the property line, her orthopedic sneakers squishing into my carefully cultivated native clover. I set the mug down. I opened the front door. The crisp Williamsburg, Virginia morning air hit my face. "Morning, Brenda," I yelled, plastering on the kind of fake retail smile that makes your cheeks hurt. "Lose a contact lens out here, or are we just aggressively measuring the dew?" Brenda stopped in her tracks, pivoting on her heel like a tank turret. She adjusted her reading glasses, which hung from a beaded chain around her neck naturally, and glared at me. "I am doing my rounds," she announced, her voice possessing the exact tonal quality of a garbage disposal grinding up a spoon. "And frankly, I am appalled. I am literally shaking right now." "You should probably get a jacket then," I said, leaning against the doorframe. "Or some carbs. Tremors are no joke at our age." Her eyes narrowed into tiny slits of pure bureaucratic rage. "This is not a joke. This infestation you call a lawn is in direct, unmitigated violation of CCNR Section 4, Paragraph B. I warned you last month, and now you leave the board in choice." I walked over to the mailbox, peeled the violently orange envelope off the metal, and ripped it open. Inside was a piece of heavy cardstock. Notice of violation and immediate fine. $500? I asked, looking up. "Brenda, honestly, for clover?" "It is not clover, it is weeds," she screeched, pointing a manicured acrylic fingernail at my yard. "The covenants are explicitly, undeniably clear. Every residence in Colonial Estates must maintain a front lawn comprised of no less than 90% Kentucky bluegrass. Your property currently features 0% Kentucky bluegrass. It looks like a feral meadow. I saw a bee in it yesterday." "Yeah, Brenda, that's kind of the point of a pollinator-friendly, drought-resistant landscape. It saves water, it helps the ecosystem, and I don't have to mow it every 3 days." "I don't care about the ecosystem," she shouted, clutching her clipboard to her chest like a shield. "I care about property values. This is a premier historical neighborhood, not a hippie commune. You have until Friday to completely remediate this soil and lay down HOA-approved sod, or the fine doubles, every single day." I looked at the fine. Then I looked at Brenda. Then I looked at the yard. "You want me to tear it all up?" I asked, my voice dropping an octave, completely calm. "I demand you tear it all up," she corrected, puffing out her chest. "Section 4, Paragraph B, requires a full topsoil remediation if the non-compliant organic matter has rooted deeper than 2 inches. Which it has. I measured it. She patted her tape measure. "You need to dig deep. Get it out of my sight. Friday, 5 p.m. Or we put a lien on your house." She turned and marched away, her pink velour suit swishing with every step. I stood there for a long moment, the morning breeze rustling my illegal, terrible, horrible, bee-attracting clover. A slow, deeply unhinged smile began to spread across my face. "Dig," I whispered to myself. "Okay, Brenda, I'll dig. I went back inside, grabbed my phone, and dialed the only man in Williamsburg crazy enough to help me comply with this specific brand of insanity. "Mike's Landscaping and Excavation," a gruff voice barked on the other end. "If you're calling about a bird bath, hang up. Mike, it's me." "Oh, hey man, what's broke?" "Nothing's broken," I said, walking into the kitchen and pouring a second cup of coffee. "But I need a favor, a big one. I need you to bring the mini excavator over to my place, like tomorrow morning." There was a pause on the line. I could hear a lighter flicking, and Mike inhaling deeply. "You want me to bring the Cat 301 to a residential subdivision? Your HOA board is gonna string me up by my steel toes. That lady, what's her name? The one who looks like a disappointed thumb?" "Brenda," I supplied. "Yeah, Brenda. She tried to have my truck towed last year because my tires left unsightly indentations on the curb. Why do you need the digger?" "Well, Mike," I said, putting it on speaker and pulling up the HOA covenants on my laptop. "Brenda just hit me with a $500 fine because my clover lawn isn't Kentucky bluegrass. She mandated a full topsoil remediation. She explicitly demanded I dig it all up, get the roots out. And honestly, I think I need to follow her instructions to the absolute letter." Mike chuckled, a low, raspy sound. "How deep we talking, boss?" She said deep. The covenants say sufficient to remove all non-compliant organic matter. I think 3 feet ought to do it, across the entire front parcel. 3 feet? Mike coughed, nearly choking on his smoke. "Dude, this is Williamsburg. You go down 3 feet in this town, you're gonna hit the 18th century before you hit the water main. You're gonna find Jimmy Hoffa's great-grandfather. That's a massive hole." "I know," I smiled. "And I'm paying your full emergency day rate. Can you be here at 8 a.m. for the chance to legally destroy an HOA lawn while the president watches?" "I'll be there at 7:45. The next morning, the tranquility of Colonial Estates was shattered by the unmistakable, thunderous, diesel-powered roar of a Caterpillar mini-excavator rolling off a flatbed trailer. I was standing in the driveway, holding 2 travel mugs of coffee, watching Mike expertly maneuver the yellow beast onto my grass. The metal tracks chewed into the clover instantly. It was beautiful. Across the street, curtains twitched. Blinds snapped up. I could practically feel the collective spike in the neighborhood's blood pressure. Mike killed the engine and popped out of the cab, grinning like a kid on Christmas. He was wearing beat-up Carhartts, a high-vis vest over a stained t-shirt, and wraparound sunglasses. He grabbed a coffee from me. "All right, boss," Mike said, gesturing to the yard. "Paint me a picture." "The HOA wants the non-compliant vegetation removed," I said, raising my voice to be heard over the idling diesel truck. "Property line to property line, down to the subsoil. We are fully complying with Brenda's mandate for topsoil remediation." "You got it," Mike said, saluting me with his coffee cup. He hopped back into the cab. The engine roared to life. The bucket swung out, the metal teeth gleaming in the morning sun. Mike dropped the bucket right in the dead center of my yard, applied downward pressure, and pulled the joysticks. Crunch! The machine effortlessly bit into the earth, ripping up a massive chunk of soil, clover, and roots. Mike swung the arm over and dumped it unceremoniously into the bed of his dump truck. Within 10 minutes, my front yard looked like the surface of the moon, or the Somme. There were massive trenches, huge piles of dark brown earth, and an absolutely catastrophic amount of mess. It was glorious. "Hey! Hey!" I turned to see Brenda literally sprinting down the sidewalk. She was out of breath, her face the color of a boiled lobster. She wasn't even in her tracksuit today. She was wearing a silk bathrobe and slippers, screaming at the top of her lungs. "Stop! Stop this immediately!" she shrieked, waving her arms frantically at the excavator. I casually strolled over to the property line. "Morning, Brenda. Beautiful day for some landscaping, isn't it?" "What are you doing?" she screamed, pointing a trembling finger at the massive crater Mike had just carved near the oak tree. "Are you insane? You're destroying the neighborhood's aesthetic. It looks like a war zone." "I'm complying, Brenda," I yelled back over the noise of the engine. "Section 4, Paragraph B. Full topsoil remediation. You told me to dig deep to get the roots out. I hired a professional to make sure we got every single non-compliant clover root. I'm just trying to follow the rules." "I meant with a shovel," she gasped, clutching her chest. "I meant you rent a sod cutter, not heavy machinery. I am calling the police." "For what?" I laughed. "Landscaping my own property between the approved hours of 8 a.m. and 6 p.m. on a weekday? It's perfectly legal, Brenda. Check the bylaws." She whipped out her phone, her thumbs flying across the screen. "You think this is funny? I am fining you for noise violations. I am fining you for unauthorized construction equipment. I am fining you for—" Clang. The sound was sharp, metallic. It echoed over the rumble of the diesel engine. Mike immediately let off the joysticks. The excavator's engine wound down to a low idle. Boss?" Mike yelled from the cab, leaning out the window and peering into the trench he had just dug. I jogged over to the edge of the hole. Brenda, unable to resist her own nosiness, cautiously tiptoed behind me, trying to keep her slippers out of the mud. Down in the dirt, about 2.5 feet below the surface, the metal teeth of the excavator bucket were resting against something dark and solid. It wasn't a rock. It was too straight. It looked like iron. Mike killed the engine completely. The sudden silence in the neighborhood was deafening. He climbed out of the cab, grabbed a small hand trowel from his tool belt, and slid down into the trench. "What is it?" "A pipe?" Brenda demanded, hovering behind my shoulder. "If you broke a water main, you are paying for the entire street's municipal assessment." Mike didn't answer. He was on his knees in the dirt, carefully brushing away the loose, loamy soil. He brushed and brushed. "Well?" I asked, my heart suddenly beating a little faster. Mike looked up at me. His face was completely pale. "Dude." "What?" He reached into the dirt and gently lifted the object. It was heavily encrusted in rust and packed earth, but the shape was unmistakable. It was a long, heavy metal tube, flared slightly at one end, with the corroded remnants of a flintlock mechanism attached to the side. It was a musket barrel. "Holy," I whispered. But Mike wasn't done. He reached back into the depression where the barrel had been resting and pulled out something else, a jagged piece of glazed ceramic, painted with a faded, intricate blue and white pattern. Then he pulled out a heavily oxidized metal button. "Boss," Mike said, his voice deadly serious. "I gotta stop digging." "Why?" Brenda snapped, pushing past me to look into the hole. "What is that junk? Trash? You're halting my neighborhood's remediation over some buried trash?" Mike looked at her like she was an alien. "Lady, we're in Williamsburg. That's not trash. That's an 18th century Brown Bess musket barrel. That's colonial Delftware pottery." He looked up at me. "I think we just hit a Revolutionary War refuse pit. Or a foundation." The implications hit me like a freight train. A slow, terrifyingly beautiful realization washed over my brain. I remembered an article I read years ago about property development in historic Virginia. "Mike," I said, my voice eerily calm, "if you hit colonial artifacts with heavy machinery—" "Yeah," Mike swallowed hard. "We gotta call the state. By law. We disturb this soil any further without a state-certified archaeologist present, and we're both committing a Class 1 misdemeanor under the Virginia Antiquities Act. Jail time. Massive fines. Loss of my commercial license." Brenda let out a sound like a deflating balloon. "No, no, 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 absolutely not. Put that trash back in the dirt. You are going to fill this hole immediately, and you are going to lay the Kentucky bluegrass. I am ordering you." I turned to Brenda. I smiled. It was a genuine, warm, terrifying smile. "Brenda," I said softly, "I can't. It's out of my hands. This isn't just a front yard anymore." I gestured grandly to the massive, ugly trenches. "This is an active, state-protected archaeological site. And if you so much as touch a single grain of dirt in this yard, you are tampering with American history." I pulled out my phone and dialed directory assistance. "Yes, hello. I need the number for the Virginia Department of Historic Resources in Richmond. It's an emergency." Brenda stood there, her mouth opening and closing like a landed fish, staring at the rusted musket barrel in Mike's dirt-caked hands. You can't do this!" she finally shrieked, pointing her finger at my chest. "The HOA covenants explicitly state that all yards must be uniform and aesthetically pleasing. The board will not allow a dirt pit in Colonial Estates. We have rules." "Brenda, listen to yourself," I said, holding the phone away from my ear as it rang. "You're quoting a laminated pamphlet. I'm quoting Title 10.1 of the Code of Virginia. State law trumps the HOA. Federal history trumps your petty little grass rules. You wanted me to dig. I dug. Now we have to let the professionals handle it." "State Department of Historic Resources, how can I direct your call?" A polite voice echoed from the phone speaker. "Hi," I said, making direct, unbroken eye contact with Brenda. "My name is Protagonist, and I reside in Williamsburg. My contractor and I were conducting some deep soil excavation mandated by my HOA, and we just unearthed what appears to be a cache of Revolutionary War-era artifacts, including a musket barrel and colonial pottery, alongside a potential stone foundation. We have ceased all digging and need to report the site immediately." The woman on the line audibly gasped. "Sir, you stopped digging? Excellent. Do not touch anything else. Do not allow anyone onto the property. I am dispatching a regional field surveyor to your location immediately. Can you secure the perimeter?" "I'll buy some caution tape right now," I promised. "Good. We take site preservation extremely seriously in the historic triangle. If anyone attempts to disturb that site, call 911. I hung up. I looked at Mike. He was already climbing out of the trench, carefully placing the artifacts on a clean patch of the remaining clover. "Mike, I need you to leave the excavator right where it is," I said. "Don't move it an inch." "Wasn't planning on it, boss." Mike grinned, shaking his head. "I get paid by the day. Whether I'm digging or babysitting a historical monument, this is the greatest day of my life." Brenda was vibrating, literally vibrating with rage. "You are doing this on purpose. You planted that garbage." "Brenda, how would I plant a rusted musket barrel 3 feet deep under unbroken soil?" I asked reasonably. "I don't care. I am calling an emergency board meeting. I am calling our lawyers. You are going to rue the day you moved into this subdivision." She spun around and stormed off toward her house, her silk robe billowing behind her. I spent the next 2 hours driving to the local hardware store. I bought 4 rolls of heavy-duty, bright yellow caution tape and a bundle of wooden stakes. When I got back, Mike helped me pound the stakes into the ground along the absolute edge of my property line, right up against the sidewalk. We wrapped the tape around the stakes, creating a glaring neon barrier around the entire yard. At noon, a white Ford Explorer with state government plates pulled up. A woman in khaki cargo pants, a sun hat, and hiking boots got out, carrying a heavy metal clipboard and a camera with a massive lens. "Mr. Protagonist?" she asked, approaching the caution tape. "I'm Sarah Higgins, senior field archaeologist with the VDHR. "Nice to meet you, Sarah," I said, shaking her hand. "Come on in, watch your step." I led her over to the trench. Mike was sitting on the treads of his excavator, eating a sandwich. Sarah knelt by the artifacts we had laid out. She pulled a pair of reading glasses down from her hat and squinted at the musket barrel. She gently turned the piece of blue and white pottery over in her gloved hands. "Delftware. Mid-18th century, no doubt about it," she muttered, clearly excited. She looked down into the trench. "And look at that soil stratification. You can see the ash layer. This wasn't just dropped here. This is an intentional refuse pit, or possibly a cellar collapse. She stood up and looked at me. Sir, you did exactly the right thing stopping work. Williamsburg is built on top of its own history, but finding undisturbed deposits in residential subdivisions is incredibly rare because developers usually bulldoze everything. Well, I'm glad we could help preserve it, I smiled modestly. We're going to need to do a preliminary survey, Sarah explained, pulling out a form. That means gridding out the yard, doing some test pits, and cataloging everything. This process can take anywhere from a few weeks to a few months, depending on what we find. During this time, the site is under the full legal protection of the state. Absolutely no construction, landscaping, or soil disturbance of any kind is permitted. What a shame, I sighed heavily. My HOA is going to be so disappointed. They really wanted me to put down some sod. Sarah scoffed, rolling her eyes. HOAs. Tell them to take it up with the governor. If anyone crosses this tape to mess with the soil, call the local police. It's a massive fine and potential jail time. She handed me a laminated sign. Zip tie this to one of your stakes. I looked at the sign. Bold red and black letters read, Warning, Protected Archaeological Site, State of Virginia. No trespassing. Unauthorized excavation or disturbance is a crime. I zip-tied it right next to my mailbox, perfectly angled so Brenda could read it from her living room window. By 3 p.m., my yard was officially a state-sanctioned dig site. Sarah and an assistant were methodically laying out a grid of string across the massive craters Mike had left. That's when the police arrived. A Williamsburg PD cruiser slowly rolled to a stop in front of my house. The lights weren't flashing, but the presence of the vehicle immediately drew a crowd. Neighbors were already peering out of their windows, and a few brave souls were walking their dogs incredibly slowly past my house, staring at the yellow tape and the state archaeologists. 2 officers stepped out. One looked incredibly bored. The other looked like he was fresh out of the academy. And storming up the sidewalk right behind them was Brenda, accompanied by 2 terrified-looking men in polo shirts, the rest of the HOA board. There, Brenda shrieked, pointing at me. Arrest him! He is destroying the neighborhood's character. He has heavy machinery, he's dug massive pits, and he's refusing to comply with a direct legal order from the board of directors. The older cop sighed, hooking his thumbs into his duty belt as he approached the property line. He stopped short of the yellow tape. Afternoon, the cop said, nodding at me. Sir, we got a call about vandalism and destruction of property. What's going on here? Hi, officer, I said cheerfully, walking up to the tape. No vandalism here, just a homeowner trying to comply with an HOA landscaping mandate. He's lying, Brenda interrupted, pushing her way past the younger cop. Look at this mess. It's a hazard. It's an eyesore. He claims he found history, but it's just a stall tactic to avoid laying sod. The older cop looked past me. He saw Mike eating potato chips on the excavator. Then he saw Sarah, deep in the trench, using a tiny trowel and a paintbrush to carefully expose more of the stone foundation. Ma'am, the cop said to Sarah. You with the state? Sarah stood up, dusting off her knees, and flashed her state ID badge. Sarah Higgins, VDHR. We're conducting an emergency site survey. This property is now a protected Class 1 archaeological site under the Virginia Antiquities Act. The older cop turned to Brenda, his expression completely flat. Ma'am, it's a state-protected site. I don't care what she says, Brenda yelled, completely losing whatever fragile grip she had on reality. The Colonial Estates HOA bylaws supersede. Let me stop you right there, Brenda, the older cop said, using her first name, which clearly enraged her further. Nothing supersedes state law. Not your HOA, not your bylaws, not your mood. If the state says this dirt is protected, it's protected. But the aesthetics, Brenda wailed, gesturing wildly at the dirt piles. The property values. The cop shrugged. Take it to civil court. But let me make this incredibly clear to you and your board. He stepped closer to Brenda, his voice dropping into that authoritative, no-nonsense tone cops perfect over decades. If you, or anyone you hire, steps over that yellow tape to plant a bush, lay sod, or move a single ounce of dirt, I will personally come back here and arrest you for a Class 1 misdemeanor. Do you understand me?" Brenda looked like she had just swallowed a lemon whole. The two board members behind her rapidly nodded their heads, suddenly very interested in looking at the pavement. "This isn't over," Brenda hissed at me, her eyes burning with pure, unadulterated hatred. "You have to finish this eventually, and when they leave, you are paying for every single blade of grass." She turned and stormed away, her lackeys trailing behind her like frightened ducklings. The older cop chuckled, shaking his head. "HOAs, man. They really think they run the world." He looked at me. "You have a good one, sir. Try not to dig up George Washington." "I'll do my best, officer," I laughed. As the cruiser pulled away, I looked over my domain. It was ugly. It was a disaster of mud, rocks, and caution tape. But to me, it was the most beautiful front yard in America. But I knew Brenda wasn't going to give up that easily. She was an HOA president. Giving up meant admitting defeat. And people like Brenda would rather burn their own houses down than admit they were wrong. She would try to use the legal system. She would try to find a loophole in my loophole. So I decided to make my loophole permanent. I went back inside, booted up my laptop, and started researching the Virginia Department of Historic Resources. I dug past the Antiquities Act and found something even better. Something nuclear. The Historic Preservation Easement Program. Basically, if you own a property with significant historic value, you can voluntarily enter into a legal agreement with the state. You grant the state a conservation easement over the property. The state holds the legal right to protect the historic resources in perpetuity. It gets attached to the deed of the house. You still own the land, but you legally surrender all developmental rights to the state government to ensure the site is never destroyed. I read through the requirements. I downloaded the forms. I started typing. "Dear VDHR Easement Committee, I am the property owner of my address. Currently undergoing an emergency Class 1 archaeological survey, site ID pending, overseen by field archaeologist Sarah Higgins. Given the significant colonial and Revolutionary War-era findings on my property, I am deeply concerned about the future preservation of this site. My local homeowners association has aggressively demanded the destruction of this site to install cosmetic landscaping. To prevent this, I wish to legally donate a permanent historic conservation easement over the front parcel of my property to the Commonwealth of Virginia." I hit send. I leaned back in my chair and smiled. Brenda wanted to weaponize contracts? Two could play that game. Her CC&Rs were a flimsy neighborhood agreement. My contract was going to be with the government of the United States of America. The next morning, the war escalated. I walked out to get the mail, carefully stepping over the caution tape, and found a thick, heavy envelope from a prominent local law firm. I opened it on the porch. "Cease and desist and notice of intent to sue." It was 5 pages of dense legal jargon from Brenda's lawyers. The summary was simple. The HOA board acknowledged the temporary state survey, but argued that the HOA bylaws mandated a reasonable timeline for aesthetic recovery. They were giving me exactly 48 hours after the state archaeologists left to completely fill the holes, level the ground, and lay the mandatory Kentucky bluegrass. If I failed to do so, they would hire their own contractors, forcefully enter my property, do the work themselves, and slap a lien on my house for the total cost, plus legal fees, plus a daily fine of $1,000. It was a bully tactic. Pure and simple. They were hoping I would panic, cave, and agree to their terms just to avoid the lawsuit. I didn't panic. I went back inside, made another pot of coffee, and drafted a reply. "To the Legal Counsel of the Colonial Estates HOA, I am in receipt of your cease and desist regarding the landscaping at my property. I find your timeline of 48 hours fascinating. Unfortunately, I must inform you that fulfilling your mandate is a legal impossibility. As of this morning, I have officially initiated the transfer of the developmental rights of my front yard to the Commonwealth of Virginia via a historic preservation easement. Upon acceptance, the state will hold absolute legal authority over the soil, landscaping, and aesthetics of the parcel in perpetuity to prevent site contamination and artifact looting. Therefore, while I would love to lay down your mandatory Kentucky bluegrass, doing so would violate Title 10.1 of the Code of Virginia, as well as the terms of my state deed restriction. Furthermore, I must strongly advise against your threat to send contractors onto my property. If Brenda, your contractors, or anyone affiliated with the HOA steps onto the property to plant so much as a petunia, they will be committing a Class 1 misdemeanor for trespassing on and looting a protected heritage site. I have already instructed the Williamsburg Police Department to arrest anyone who crosses the yellow tape. If you wish to pursue aesthetic alterations to the property, you may file a formal request with the Virginia Department of Historic Resources in Richmond. Good luck. Warmest regards, me. I hit send on the email. Then, because I am petty, I took a screenshot of the letter, redacted my personal info, and posted it to the Colonial Estates Private Neighborhood Facebook group. Caption: Hey neighbors, just an update on the front yard. Looks like I legally can't put grass down ever again because Brenda accidentally forced me to discover a Revolutionary War site. Thanks for the push, Brenda. History lives here. Within 10 minutes, the post had 40 likes and 50 comments. The tide was turning. Brenda wasn't just fighting me anymore. She was becoming the laughingstock of her own fiefdom. But a wounded animal is the most dangerous kind. And Brenda, seeing her absolute authority crumbling in front of the entire neighborhood, decided to do something incredibly stupid. She decided to go rogue. It was a Thursday night, about 2 weeks into the archaeological survey. Sarah and her team had packed up for the week, leaving the grid lines and caution tape intact. It was 2 a.m. I was awake, lying in bed, scrolling through my phone, when I heard it. A low, rumbling sound outside. A diesel engine. Not a massive excavator like Mike's, but something smaller, like a skid steer loader. I threw off the blankets, crept over to the window, and peeked through the blinds. The streetlights illuminated a truly bizarre scene. A small, unmarked landscaping truck was parked illegally on the street, idling quietly. Attached to the back was a trailer holding pallets of fresh green sod. And creeping up my driveway was a bobcat skid steer, driven by a guy in a hoodie. Standing on the sidewalk, holding a flashlight and frantically gesturing for the bobcat to move faster, was Brenda. She was wearing dark clothes, trying to look like a ninja, but the street lamp glinted off her reading glass chain. She was actually doing it. She had hired a midnight under-the-table crew to execute a hostile landscaping takeover while I was asleep. She was going to fill the trenches, destroy the grid, and lay the sod before the state could stop her. I didn't turn on a single light in the house. I walked out of my bedroom, grabbed my phone, and bypassed the local police entirely. I dialed the emergency after-hours dispatch for the Virginia State Police, specifically requesting the duty officer for the Department of Historic Resources. State Police, what is your emergency? I have an active hostile incursion on a Class 1 state-protected archaeological site, I said, keeping my voice low. Site address is 104 Colonial Way. Intruders are operating heavy machinery, attempting to fill the excavation trenches and destroy artifacts. Suspect is the president of the local HOA. Sir, you have heavy machinery on a protected site right now. The dispatcher's voice sharpened immediately. Yes. They are crossing the caution tape as we speak. Do not engage the suspects. I am dispatching multiple state trooper units and notifying the local PD for backup. ETA is 3 minutes. Stay inside. I hung up. I moved to the front door, slowly unlocked it, and cracked it open just an inch. The bobcat had reached the edge of the grass. The driver lowered the bucket, full of topsoil, preparing to dump it directly into the trench where Sarah had uncovered the foundation wall. "Hurry up! Dump it and grade it!" Brenda hissed loudly. "We only have a few hours before the sun comes up. I want that sod laid by 5 a.m. The driver hesitated. "Lady, there's yellow tape everywhere. This sign says state protected. I am the president of the HOA. I am legally authorizing this. Do your job or you don't get paid," she snapped. The driver shrugged, revved the engine, and moved forward, snapping the yellow caution tape. At that exact moment, the peaceful Williamsburg night erupted. 3 separate police cruisers, 2 state police interceptors, and 1 local PD SUV screeched onto the street from both directions. They didn't use sirens, but they hit the floodlights. Suddenly, my front yard was illuminated by blinding, strobing beams of red, blue, and searing white light. "Virginia State Police, kill the engine and step out of the vehicle with your hands in the air!" A booming voice echoed over a megaphone. The Bobcat driver practically jumped out of his own skin. He slammed on the brakes, killed the engine, and threw his hands up so fast he almost hit his head on the roll cage. Brenda froze like a deer in headlights. The flashlight dropped from her hand, clattering onto the concrete. Doors slammed. Heavy boots hit the pavement. 4 state troopers, wearing wide-brimmed campaign hats and looking incredibly intimidating, swarmed the property. I stepped out onto the porch, finally turning on my porch light, sipping a cold glass of water. "What is the meaning of this?" Brenda shrieked, though her voice cracked with terror. "I am remediating a hazard. This is private property." A massive state trooper walked right up to her. "Ma'am, you are standing on a state-protected archaeological site. Did you hire this equipment to disturb the soil?" "I am enforcing HOA bylaws," she screamed, pointing at me on the porch. "He refused to lay sod." The trooper didn't even blink. He pulled a pair of handcuffs off his belt. "Ma'am, under Title 10.1 of the Virginia Code, unauthorized excavation, damage, or defacement of a protected archaeological site is a Class 1 misdemeanor. Turn around and place your hands behind your back." Brenda's eyes rolled back in her head, and for a second I thought she was going to pass out. You can't arrest me. I'm Brenda. I'm the president." "Not right now, you aren't," the trooper said, grabbing her wrist and clicking the steel cuff into place. "Right now, you're under arrest for trespassing and attempted destruction of state property." The Bobcat driver was already being patted down by another trooper against the hood of the landscaping truck. "Man, she told me it was her property. She said she had the permits," he was babbling. I walked down the steps. The local PD officer from the other day was there, leaning against his SUV, shaking his head. "Told her, didn't I?" he muttered to me as I walked past. "You did," I nodded. I walked right up to where the trooper was escorting Brenda toward the cruiser. She looked at me, her mascara running, her pastel reign of terror completely shattered. "You did this," she spat, venom dripping from her words. "No, Brenda," I smiled, my voice perfectly calm. "I just followed the rules. You told me to dig deep. I just dug deeper." The aftermath was swift and absolute. Brenda spent the night in a holding cell. The rogue contractor's Bobcat was impounded as evidence in a state crime. The HOA board, terrified of being indicted as co-conspirators in Brenda's midnight raid, held an emergency vote at 8 a.m. the next morning. They stripped Brenda of her presidency and kicked her off the board entirely. The law firm that sent me the cease and desist? They dropped the HOA as a client immediately, not wanting to touch a state-level criminal tampering case with a 10-foot pole. As for my yard, the state approved my historic conservation easement a month later. My front property was legally untouchable. The state archaeologists finished their survey, mapping a beautiful, intact 18th century cellar and recovering over 200 artifacts, which were sent to a museum in Richmond. When they were done, they filled the holes, using state funds, of course, and planted a historically accurate, natural landscape, which, ironically, included a lot of clover. But the absolute best part? The cherry on top of this malicious compliance sundae? Because the site was historically significant, the Virginia Department of Historic Resources installed a marker, a beautiful, solid bronze plaque mounted on a heavy iron post, right on the property line, right where Brenda could see it from her living room window every single day for the rest of her life. It read, "Site of 18th century colonial habitation, excavated and protected by the Commonwealth of Virginia, preserved in perpetuity." There wasn't a single blade of Kentucky bluegrass in sight. Honestly, if someone ever tries to fine you for letting nature take its course, just remember this: you don't always have to fight the rules. Sometimes you just have to find older, bigger, scarier rules. You never know what kind of leverage is buried right under your feet. Just ask Brenda, assuming she's done paying off her legal fees.